The rust-red dust of Tartarus settled on everything, a fine or metallic silt that coated the bulkheads of Kalen's salvage rig, the stray dog, and worked its way into the very fibers of his soul. He'd been out here for 3 years, a ghost haunting the edge of the great cosmic graveyard the galaxy called the Veil. It wasn't a formal name, not one you'd find on any concordance star chart. To them, it was Sector 734, a blighted expanse of dead stars and shattered worlds permanently quarantined, a cosmic wound cordoned off from the pristine, ordered civilization that lay beyond. But everyone knew what it really was. It was the cage they'd built around old Earth. The Concordance, in its infinite, suffocating wisdom, had decreed that the cradle of humanity was too wild, too steeped in a history of beautiful, terrifying chaos to be part of their grand, placid design. So they drew a line, not of fire, but of silence, and left everything within to rot. It was forbidden space, a place you didn't enter unless you were already broken, already lost, or, like Kalen, you were simply looking for the things they'd thrown away. He was a junker, a hauler of ghosts, pulling scrap from the skeletal remains of warships that had fought in wars no one remembered. The Concordance didn't fear humanity for its starships or its weapons. They feared its memory, the unsanitized, unredacted truth of what the species was capable of when it was backed into a corner. They feared the stories, the whispers of how a small, fractious species from a single mudball had once burned a path to the stars, fueled by nothing more than spite and desperation. The official histories spoke of humanity's ascension, a peaceful integration into the galactic community. Kalen, picking through the slagged hulls of dreadnoughts and the fractured bones of forgotten colonies, knew better. Ascension was just a pretty word for surrender. One day, his long-range resonance scanner pinged, a faint, rhythmic pulse that was utterly out of place in the silent graveyard of Tartarus. It wasn't the echo of dead metal or the groan of a decaying orbit. It was structured, clean, a heartbeat in a mausoleum. He tracked it to a debris field, the scattered remnants of a vessel so old its design was almost mythical, a pre-concordance frigate, a Revenant-class scout ship. According to the fragmented registry codes still flickering on a piece of its hull, they were ghost ships, relics from the Unification Wars, the last great conflict before humanity had been tamed. The signal was coming from the ship's core, a section of the hull that had been sheared clean off but had somehow maintained its integrity. He nudged the stray dog closer, its magnetic grapples clanking against the scarred metal. This wasn't scrap. It was a time capsule. He spent a day cutting through the hull, the air in his helmet thick with the smell of ozone and his own sweat. Inside, emergency lights still cast a sickly green pall over everything. The corridors were pristine, untouched by the vacuum that had claimed the rest of the ship, and in the center of the med bay, nestled among shattered diagnostic screens and frozen medical supplies, was a single cryopod. It was military grade, an old Terran Federation model designed to keep a soldier in stasis through catastrophic injury. The pulse was coming from inside. Kalen's heart hammered against his ribs. Scavenging was one thing. This was something else entirely. Concordance law was absolute on the matter of pre-ascension artifacts, especially biological ones. To disturb one was to invite erasure, a quiet visit from an observer who would wipe your existence from every databank and your memory from every mind that ever knew you. But the curiosity, the sheer bloody-minded need to know, was a deeper instinct. He was a son of Earth. After all, and digging through graves was in his blood. He hooked the pod to his rig's power supply, bypassing its own failing systems. The diagnostic panel flickered to life, a string of archaic code running across the screen. Subject Alara Vaughn. Status critical. Stasis field integrity, 0.7%. He initiated the thawing sequence. It was a reckless, stupid decision, the kind his father, a man who had embraced the concordance with the fervor of a convert, would have condemned. But Kalen hadn't seen his father in a decade. He'd chosen the ghosts of the veil over the sterile comfort of a managed life. The pod hissed, a long, slow sigh of ancient air. The frost on the viewport melted away, revealing the face of a woman, pale and still as marble. Her hair was cut short, military style, and even in stasis. Her features were set in a hard, uncompromising line. He watched as the monitors began to register a heartbeat, faint at first, then stronger. Brain activity spiked. Her eyes snapped open. They weren't the calm, placid eyes of a concordance citizen. They were frantic, sharp, blazing with a terror and fury that felt more real than anything Kalen had seen in years. She lurched forward, her hands slamming against the inside of the viewport. A silent scream etched on her face. Kalen recoiled, a jolt of primal fear running through him. This was not some docile ancestor. This was a wolf, caged and terrified. He keyed the release, and the pod opened with a pneumatic hiss. She stumbled out, gasping, her body shaking uncontrollably as her muscles remembered how to move. She scanned the medbay, her gaze finally landing on him, and her eyes narrowed. "Where is my fire team?" she rasped, her voice a dry, unused thing. "Who are you?" Her hand instinctively went to her hip, searching for a weapon that wasn't there. "Easy," Kalen said, holding up his hands. "You're safe. Your ship, it was destroyed." Her eyes didn't soften. "The Shepherd. Did it get through? Did we stop it?" Kalen had never heard the term. "I don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing out there but wreckage. You've been in stasis for a long time, over 200 years. The color drained from her face. The fight in her eyes flickered, replaced by a profound, soul-crushing despair. 200 years. A lifetime. An entire history. She collapsed to her knees, the weight of it too much to bear. It was in that moment of vulnerability that the first warning came, a proximity alert chiming softly on his rig's console. Kalen's blood ran cold. A single ship had just dropped out of phase space at the edge of the debris field. It was small, sleek, and matte black, with no registry, no broadcast signal. An observer. They hadn't even waited. The discovery of the pod must have triggered some silent, ancient alarm deep within the Concordance's network. They weren't here to ask questions. They were here to clean up. "We have to go," he said, pulling her to her feet. Now, her soldier's instincts kicked in, overriding her grief. She nodded, her jaw set. "Who's coming for us?" "The people who put you in that box," he said, pushing her toward the airlock that led to the stray dog. "And they don't like leaving witnesses." Back on his bridge, the observer ship was already moving, gliding through the wreckage with an unnatural grace. It didn't hail them. It didn't launch fighters. It simply extended a long, thin filament from its hull, a shimmering thread that began to pulse with energy, a data scythe. It was designed to slice through a ship's systems, wipe its memory cores, and overload its reactor in a matter of seconds. It was a tool for sanitization, not combat. Alara stared at the approaching ship, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified recognition. "That's not Concordance," she whispered. "That's one of theirs. That's a shepherd's blade." Before Kalen could ask what she meant, she was at a secondary console, her fingers flying across the keypad with a speed and confidence that spoke of years of training. "Your weapon systems are scrap," she said, her voice tight. "But your engines are overbuilt. I can vent the plasma coolant directly into the main thruster. It'll be uncontrolled. It might tear the ship apart, but it'll be fast." "Do it." Kalen grunted, his knuckles white on the flight controls. The stray dog shuddered as she rerouted the power, alarms screaming across the bridge. The back of his seat slammed into him as the rig launched forward, a raw, unguided missile of pure thrust. The data scythe lashed out, missing them by meters and slicing a nearby piece of wreckage in half without a sound. They were moving, but they were also a beacon, a flare of raw power in a sector that was supposed to be dark and silent. The observer would follow. It was a hunter, and they were its only prey. As they streaked away from the ghost ship and the debris field, Alara managed to pull a single, heavily corrupted data file from the cryopod's memory buffer before its systems finally died. It was a star chart, but it was overlaid with locations that didn't exist on any concordance map. They were designated as pastoral sites. And next to each one was a single chilling symbol, a shepherd's crook. "They weren't trying to destroy us," Alara said, her voice barely a whisper as she stared at the screen. "They were trying to herd us, to cull the herd." Kalen looked from the star chart to the woman beside him, a living relic from a forgotten war, and then to the black ship that was patiently, inexorably closing the distance behind them. He had spent his life picking through the bones of his ancestors, content to live among their ghosts. But now he had one sitting next to him, and the shepherds who had tried to put her down were coming to finish the job. The silence of the veil had been broken, and Kalen knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the piece the Concordance had built was a lie, a carefully tended pasture, and the gate was about to be kicked wide open. He pushed the throttle as far as it would go, the old rig groaning in protest as they plunged deeper into the forbidden heart of human space, running not just for their lives, but for the memory of the wolves that had once roamed free. The stray dog screamed through the veil, a wounded animal fleeing a silent, patient predator. Behind them, the observer ship was a sliver of absolute black against the star-dusted void, a void shark that didn't need to hurry. It matched their every desperate burn, every sharp, bone-jarring turn. Kalen's hands were slick on the controls, his eyes darting between the forward view screen and the proximity alert that pulsed a venomous red. "It's anticipating our course corrections," Alara stated, her voice a low, steady hum that cut through the cacophony of alarms. She was strapped into the co-pilot's chair, her face illuminated by the glow of a tactical display she'd managed to coax from the rig's ancient systems. "It's not just following us, it's learning. Standard Terran evasion pattern Delta 7. You're flying by the book." Kalen gritted his teeth. "It's the only book I've got. What would you do?" A grim smile touched her lips. "I'd fly straight into hell and see if it had the guts to follow." He glanced at her, at the fire in her eyes, the ghost of a soldier who saw every problem as a nail for a very specific, very explosive hammer. An idea. Insane and suicidal news sparked in his mind. "All right," he said, pulling a new chart onto the main screen. It was a chaotic mess of red polygons and shifting gravitational warnings. "Hold on. I know a place." The chart depicted a region known to Veil runners as the Grinder, a swirling maelstrom of debris from the final battle of the Outer Rim Rebellion. It wasn't just inert scrap. The field was seeded with self-replicating mines, autonomous warheads from 2 centuries ago that were still following their last command: seek and destroy. They were dumb, indiscriminate, and utterly lethal. No sane pilot went near it. The observer, with its cold, predictive logic, would never anticipate such a move. "You're going in there?" Alara asked, her voice tight with a respect Kalen hadn't heard before. "It'll tear us apart." "It'll tear anything apart," Chai corrected, his knuckles white. "That's the point. It's an equal opportunity nightmare." He cut the main drive, letting their momentum carry them toward the glittering, churning edge of the debris field. The stray dog went quiet, the roar of the engine replaced by the creak of stressed metal and the frantic thumping of his own heart. The observer followed, a relentless shadow. "When I give the word, vent the plasma again," Kalen instructed. "Just a short burst. I need to time it." They drifted closer, the first pieces of shrapnel pinging off their hull like angry hornets. A mine, a spidery collection of antennae and ordnance, drifted past their viewport, its proximity sensor glowing a dull, menacing red. Kalen held his breath. The observer was less than a kilometer behind them now, its data scythe beginning to glow. "Now," he barked. Alara slammed her hand down on the console. A violent shudder ran through the ship as a plume of incandescent plasma erupted from the thruster, sending them careening sideways, directly into the densest part of the field. The observer, caught off guard by the sudden, so illogical vector change, followed them in. For the next 10 minutes, hell was a symphony of screeching metal and concussive blasts. Kalen wasn't flying. He was dancing, weaving the bulky salvage rig through a blizzard of spinning blades and hungry warheads. Shrapnel tore through the outer hull, and a mine detonated close enough to send a spiderweb of cracks across the main viewport. Ilara, meanwhile, was fighting a different war. She had a damage control schematic on her screen, rerouting power from non-essential systems, sealing microfractures with emergency plasma welds, her hands a blur of calculated efficiency. The observer wasn't so lucky. Its predictive algorithms were useless against pure chaos. It dodged one mine only to be clipped by the shrapnel of another. A larger piece of debris, the turret of some long-dead cruiser, slammed into its port side. It faltered. It's perfect. Silent grace shattered. Then, 2 mines converged on it at once. The explosion was silent, but immense. A bloom of white-hot light that momentarily bleached the stars from the sky. When Kalen dared to look back, there was nothing but an expanding cloud of vaporized metal. They had done it. They had survived. But the stray dog was crippled. They limped out of the grinder with their port engine sputtering, life support running on auxiliary power, and half their systems fried. They found refuge in the shadow of a dead gas giant, a vast, silent behemoth whose magnetic field would hide their faint energy signature. For a day, they worked in silence, patching what they could, the adrenaline giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. It was during this quiet, tense period that the reality of their situation began to sink in. "They know I'm awake," Alara said, her voice flat. She was holding the corrupted data core from her pod, turning it over and over in her hands. That observer wasn't just sent to silence you. It was sent to reclaim me. The shepherds don't leave loose ends. Kalen looked up from a mess of wiring he was trying to splice together. Who are they? You called that ship a shepherd's blade. What does that mean? Ilara's eyes were distant, haunted. During the Unification Wars, humanity was fractured. We were fighting ourselves, colony against colony. A faction emerged, a group of scientists, geneticists, and strategists. They called themselves the Shepherds. They believed humanity's greatest flaw was its volatility, its passion, its, chaos. They saw us not as a species to be led, but as a flock to be managed. They wanted to prune the undesirable traits, to breed a more docile, more predictable human. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They started with black sites, abducting soldiers, colonists, anyone who showed too much genetic deviancy. My fire team and I discovered one of their labs, one of the pastoral sites. We saw what they were doing. They weren't just killing people. They were editing them, rewriting them at a genetic level. We tried to get the word out, but they were already everywhere, embedded in the highest levels of the Federation command. The shepherd ships were their tools, surgical, silent, designed to prune the wolves from the flock. Kalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the failing life support, the concordance, the ascension. It wasn't a surrender, it was the final victory of the shepherds. They had won the war 200 years ago, and no one had even known they were fighting. They had successfully managed their flock, creating a galaxy-spanning pasture of serene, compliant sheep. So the concordance is them, he asked. Or it's what they built, she corrected. A perfect, orderly cage. And you and I just rattled the bars. Kalen leaned back against the bulkhead, the enormity of it washing over him. His entire life, his entire world, was a lie. This data core, Ilara continued, holding it up, is the only evidence we have. It contains the locations of their other sites, their command structure. It's why they sent that ship. It's why they'll send more. It's corrupted, Kalen pointed out. We can't access it. Not with this junk heap, she agreed. But you know this place. You've survived out here. Is there anyone, anything, that could break this encryption? Kalen was silent for a long time. There was one person, a ghost, even more so than himself. A man who had delved so deep into pre-concordance technology that he'd become an artifact himself. A data miner and codebreaker named Silas, who lived in a hermitage carved into an asteroid perpetually orbiting the accretion disk of the Cygnus X1 black hole. Going to Silas was a death sentence. The concordance left him alone because the journey to reach him was more dangerous than any weapon they could deploy. But they were out of options. There was no going back to his quiet life of scavenging. The observer had burned that bridge. And looking at Ilara, at the fierce, desperate hope in her eyes, he knew he couldn't leave her to fight this alone. She was the last echo of a humanity he'd only ever read about, a humanity that fought back. There's a man, Kalen said slowly. He's not stable. He's not friendly. And getting to him might kill us. But if anyone can crack a 200-year-old military ghost code, it's him. Ilara nodded, a flicker of grim determination on her face. Set the course. The journey to Cygnus X1 took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of patching the ship, rationing supplies, and navigating the treacherous currents of the Veil. They traveled in darkness, their ship a cold, silent rock, a single act of defiance in a universe that demanded conformity. When they finally arrived, the sight was both terrifying and beautiful. The black hole was a point of absolute nothingness, surrounded by a swirling, incandescent disk of matter being torn apart, a cosmic whirlpool of light and radiation. And nestled in the relative calm of a stable orbit was Silas's hermitage, a hollowed-out asteroid bristling with sensor arrays and communication dishes, all pointed away from the Concordance, toward the silent, screaming heart of the galaxy. Getting permission to dock was a paranoid dance of counter codes and security scans. Finally, a gravelly voice crackled over their comms. "You're either brave, stupid, or Kalen, seeing as you're still alive. I'm guessing it's the third one. Docking Bay 3. Don't touch anything." The inside of the Hermitage was a labyrinth of wires, humming servers, and holographic screens displaying streams of archaic code. Silas was a wraith of a man, thin and pale, with cybernetic eyes that glowed a soft blue. He looked Ilara up and down, his gaze lingering on her antiquated military jumpsuit. "A real one," he breathed, a strange reverence in his voice. "I've only ever seen them in shielded archives." "A true Terran wolf." Kalen explained their situation. The ship, the chase, the data core. Silas listened, his head cocked, his cybernetic eyes never blinking. He took the core from Ilara's hand, his fingers tracing the scorch marks on its casing. "Shepard's work," he muttered. "I've seen their digital fingerprints before, deep in the Concordance's foundational code. A ghost in the machine, a shepherd tending its flock. Most people think it's just a poetic term for the system's fail-safe protocols." He looked at them, and, for the first time, Kalen saw a flicker of something other than paranoid detachment in the man's glowing eyes. It might have been fear. "You don't know what you found. Do you? You haven't just rattled the cage. You found the zookeeper's keys." He slotted the core into a massive, humming console. For a moment, the room was filled with the screech of dying data and digital static. Then, a single, clean file opened on the main screen. It wasn't a list of sites. It wasn't a command structure. It was a list of names, hundreds of them, family lines, genetic markers, and at the top of the list, under the heading Primary Deviant Lineage, slated for pruning, was a name that made Kalen's blood turn to ice. It was his family name, Varric. The silence in the Hermitage was a heavy, suffocating thing, broken only by the hum of Silas's servers and the frantic pounding of Kalen's own blood in his ears. The name Varric shimmered on the screen, an indictment, a death sentence written 2 centuries ago. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the asteroid beneath his feet had suddenly ceased to exist. His father, a stern, unyielding man who preached the virtues of the Concordance's order, who saw the Veil as a pit of degenerates and his own son's profession as a mark of shame, was his entire life, his father's life, a lie built on a foundation of sanitized history. "This is a mistake," Kalen whispered, the words tasting like ash. "A ghost, some other Varric." Silas turned, his glowing blue eyes devoid of pity. "The shepherds are not sentimental, Kalen. They are geneticists. The file is keyed to your entire lineage. Your great-great-grandfather, General Tiber Varric. He wasn't just a soldier in the Unification Wars. He was the architect of the Terran resistance, the one who argued against the Ascension Treaty until the very end. He called it a gilded cage. It seems he was more right than he knew. He tapped a few keys, and an old, grainy image appeared on the screen, a man in a dark military uniform, his face hard and unyielding, the same sharp jawline and stubborn set to his eyes that Kalen saw in the mirror every morning. My father told me our ancestors were engineers, builders, Kalen said, his voice hollow. History is written by the shepherds, not the wolves, Alara said quietly, stepping closer to him. Her voice wasn't accusatory. It was filled with a strange, fierce pride. You carry the blood of a man who refused to kneel. That isn't a death sentence. It's a legacy. She looked from Kalen's face to the image on the screen, and a spark of understanding lit her eyes. She finally saw him not as a junker, a scavenger of bones, but as the last ember of a fire she thought had been extinguished forever. The revelation settled in Kalen's gut like a block of ice. His life on the edge, his instinctive distrust of authority, his pull towards the forgotten chaos of the Veil. It wasn't just a choice. It was an echo, an inheritance. And the shepherds, with their meticulous, patient planning, had been waiting for that echo to fade completely. There's more, Silas muttered, his attention once again consumed by the data stream he was unscrambling. The screen flickered, shifting from the list of names to a series of complex diagrams and timelines. This isn't just a list of targets. It's a component of a much larger protocol, codenamed the Final Pasture. He magnified a section of the code, and his breath hitched. My God, they're not just pruning the flock anymore. What do you mean? Ilara asked, her soldier's focus snapping back to the threat. Pruning is inefficient, Silas explained, his voice a low, horrified monotone. It leaves room for mutation, for unexpected deviancy to reemerge. This is a cure, a genetic update. They've developed a retrovirus, a nanite strain designed to be deployed system-wide. It targets specific neurochemical markers associated with aggression, nonconformity, and intense emotional responses. It doesn't kill you. It just edits you. It turns the wolves into sheep, permanently. Kalen felt a wave of nausea. He thought of the teeming cities of the Concordance, the billions of people living their placid, orderly lives, completely unaware that their very souls were being targeted for erasure. How would they deploy it? Silas pointed a trembling finger at a schematic of a standard Concordance public med booth. Through these, and atmospheric processors, food synthesizers, water purification systems. It's designed to be ubiquitous and invisible, a mandatory health update for the entire species. He zoomed in on a timeline, a countdown clock ticking away in milliseconds, and it's already begun. The final activation sequence is scheduled to be broadcast in less than a standard week. A cold, hard fury began to replace Kalen's shock. This was it. The endgame. The final, silent conquest of the human spirit. He looked at Alara, and her face was a mask of cold fury. This was the enemy she had fought 2 centuries ago. An enemy that had simply refined its methods from surgical strikes to systemic genocide of the soul. Where is the broadcast coming from? She demanded. The command node for this pasture protocol. Where is it? Silas ran the trace, the holographic map of the galaxy spinning as his systems followed the encrypted pathway back to its source. It didn't lead to a black site in the Veil or a hidden military installation. The signal path resolved on a single, brightly lit point in the very heart of the Concordance. Ethelberg, Silas breathed. The Citadel, the administrative and cultural capital of the Concordance, the most secure, most monitored place in the known universe. The irony was crushing. The shepherds were going to neuter humanity from the very symbol of its tranquil, less civilized peak, hiding in plain sight, using the tools of peace and health to wage their final, silent war. Then that's where we're going, Kalen said. The words came out before he even had time to think. A raw, instinctual declaration. Silas scoffed, turning away from the console. Don't be a fool. Your rig is a wreck. And even if it wasn't, it would be flagged and vaporized before you got within a light year. You can't get into Ethelberg. It's a fortress. We're not asking to get in, Alara said, her voice like flint. We're telling you to find us a way. Silas stared at them, his cybernetic eyes cycling through diagnostic routines as if trying to compute their insanity. He had spent his life hiding from the system, studying its cracks from a safe distance. They were asking him to help them walk directly into its heart. He looked at the data core, at the proof of the shepherd's long, patient coup, and then at the countdown clock ticking inexorably toward zero. He was a hermit, a ghost, but even ghosts could be haunted by the things they failed to do. There might be a way. He finally conceded, walking toward a dark, dust-covered section of the hangar bay. He keyed a command into a hidden panel, and a section of the floor slid away, revealing a small, sleek ship nestled in a hidden sublevel. It was a modified Icarus-class courier, painted a non-reflective black, its lines blurred by stealth plating and illegal sensor baffles. My escape plan. For when the Concordance finally got tired of me living on their doorstep, I call her the Echo. She has a clean registry, forged transponder codes, and a cargo hold shielded enough to smuggle a black hole through customs. She's not a warship, but she can run silent and deep. He turned back to them, his expression grim. I can get you to Ethelberg. I can even give you the tools you'll need to break into the Citadel's central server hub. I've been mapping its digital architecture for years. I can build you a viral key, a digital ghost that will get you through their firewalls. He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. But it will have to be deployed manually. You'll have to get to the physical server itself. And once you're inside, you're on your own. If you're caught, I will erase any record that you were ever here. I will not have them following you back to my door. Understood. Alara said without hesitation. Kalen nodded, his mind already racing. He looked at the Echo, then back at the familiar, battered hull of the stray dog. He was shedding his old life like a snake shedding its skin. He was no longer a scavenger. He was a saboteur, a rebel, a Varric. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Silas loaded the Echo's systems with his viral key and a suite of infiltration tools. He gave them a pair of identity chips, keyed to the personas of a minor trade delegate and his security attaché, with just enough of a digital footprint to pass a cursory scan. Alara, in turn, stripped the stray dog of its few remaining functional weapons, modifying a plasma cutter into a crude but powerful breaching tool and packing their last few concussion charges. She worked with a focused intensity, a warrior rediscovering her purpose. Kalen watched her, learning, absorbing her economy of motion, her absolute certainty in the face of impossible odds. She was teaching him how to be the wolf his ancestors had been. As they prepared to board the Echo, Kalen stood for a moment at the hangar bay's viewport, looking out at the swirling chaos of the black hole's accretion disk. He had always found a strange comfort in the Veil's lawlessness, in its honest decay. Now, he was about to trade it for the sterile, dishonest order of the Concordance. He was leaving his home, the only one he'd ever truly known. Ready, Alara asked, standing beside him. She was dressed in the dark, functional uniform of a security attaché, the disguise fitting her like a second skin. No, Kalen admitted, but it doesn't matter. He turned away from the Veil and walked toward the ship that would carry them into the belly of the beast. They were two ghosts, a soldier out of time and a junker who had just discovered his history. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and were about to declare a secret war against an enemy that had already won. But the shepherds had made one critical miscalculation. They had forgotten that when you try to erase a wolf's history, you don't destroy it. You just make it hungry. The journey to Ethelberg was a masterclass in tension. The Echo moved through concordant space like a phantom. Silas's forged transponders broadcasting the mundane identity of a freighter hauling rare earth metals from a frontier mining colony. Kalen, now posing as trade delegate Kelveric, a distant, unimportant cousin of a more influential merchant family, found the deception chafing. The crisp, formal lines of his borrowed suit felt like a cage, a stark contrast to the worn, functional gear he'd lived in for years. He sat at the helm, his hands resting lightly on the controls, the ship's advanced systems a world away from the rattling, temperamental stray dog. Everything was smooth, quiet, and clean. It made his skin crawl. Ilara, now his security attaché, Lyra, was unnervingly at ease. She moved with a quiet, coiled grace, her eyes constantly scanning, her posture relaxed but ready. She had spent a lifetime in uniform, and the disguise was simply a different kind of armor. She spent the transit time studying the Citadel's schematics that Silas had provided, her mind absorbing layouts, security patrols, and system vulnerabilities with a terrifying focus. She was a weapon being aimed, and the calm before the firing was her natural state. "You're thinking too loud," she said one cycle, without looking up from the holographic schematic she was manipulating. "Your heart rate is elevated. You keep flexing your hands. A real trade delegate is bored. Kyle, annoyed, entitled. He's not expecting a fight." Kalen let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "I've spent my life avoiding places like this. Now I'm walking into the center of it all. It feels wrong. It is wrong." She agreed, her gaze finally meeting his. "That's how you know you're in the right place." The shepherds built their power on the belief that no one would ever look for them in the light. They've hidden their war behind a wall of peace. We're not soldiers storming a fortress. We're a disease, a virus. We have to act like we belong there until it's too late for them to cut us out. Her words resonated with him. He was a junker, a hauler of ghosts. He knew how to find the cracks in things, the forgotten access panels, the overlooked flaws. This was just a different kind of salvage. Instead of picking through the bones of dead ships, he was about to pick through the foundations of a living empire. Ethelberg, when it came into view, was breathtaking. It wasn't a planet or a station, but a Dyson swarm, a glittering lacework of habitats, parks, and crystalline towers orbiting a young, bright star. It was the pinnacle of concordance engineering, a monument to order and tranquility. Ships glided between the habitats on rivers of light, and there was no sign of military presence, No overt display of power. It was the perfect pasture, serene and beautiful. Its fences invisible, but absolute. They passed through the outer security checkpoints with unnerving ease. Automated systems scanned their ship, cross-referenced their transponder with shipping manifests, and waved them through. No one looked too closely. They were insignificant, a single drop of water in an ocean of routine commerce. Their landing clearance directed them to a commercial docking bay on the Citadel, the central administrative hub of the entire swarm. The Citadel was a marvel, a structure of spun metal and smart glass that seemed to defy gravity, its spires reaching toward the captive sun like supplicating hands. As they disembarked, the air itself felt different. It was clean, perfectly temperature-controlled, and carried the faint scent of ozone and blooming flora from the Citadel's famous hanging gardens. Citizens of 100 different worlds glided past on moving walkways, their faces calm and placid, their movements unhurried. There was no shouting, no conflict, no chaos. Kalen felt a profound sense of alienation, a wolf in a world of well-fed sheep. Central Communications Hub is in the Citadel's core. Sub-level 12, Alara murmured, her voice a low hum in his ear through their encrypted comms. According to Silas's intel, the primary server that controls the final pasture broadcast is physically isolated in a zero-clearance data vault. We need to get down there. They moved through the Citadel's grand concourse, their forged identity chips granting them access through the soft, chiming security gates. Their first hurdle was the turbo lift to the sublevels. Access was restricted to administrative and technical personnel. Kalen's persona as a trade delegate wouldn't get them past the scanner. This was where Silas's ghost key came into play. As they approached the turbo lift, Kalen casually leaned against a nearby info kiosk, his data slate in hand as if checking an appointment. In reality, he was uploading the first stage of Silas's virus into the Citadel's public network. It was a subtle, insidious piece of code, designed not to crash the system, but to manipulate it. A moment later, a maintenance alert flashed on the screen of the security guard manning the turbo lift station. "Apologies, delegate," the guard said, his voice a placid monotone. "There appears to be a minor atmospheric sensor malfunction on sub-level 9. I need to dispatch a tech team." Right on cue. Alara's data slate, now mirroring a tech dispatch order, chimed. She held it up for the guard to see. "We were just redirected," she said, her tone clipped and professional. "Priority override from central maintenance. We're to perform a diagnostic." The guard glanced at her slate, his own console, and shrugged. The system told him it was true, so it was true. He keyed them access. Very well. Sub-level 9 is restricted, but the override is confirmed. Proceed. The turbo lift descended, a silent, frictionless drop into the Citadel's bowels. The polished marble and holographic art of the upper levels gave way to sterile white corridors and humming server conduits. Sub-level 9 was a maze of maintenance tunnels and power relays. They were in the machine now. They found a secluded access junction, and Kalen uploaded the second stage of the virus. This was the critical part. The code was a digital mimic designed to create a phantom security alert on the other side of the Citadel, a significant but non-critical event that would draw the bulk of the security patrols away from the core. It'll take 10 minutes for the security shift to rotate and respond, Alara said, checking her chrono. That's our window to get from here to sub-level 12 and breach the data vault. They moved quickly, their soft-soled boots making no sound on the metallic floor. The path was exactly as Silas's schematics had predicted. They were ghosts in the machine, moving through the arteries of a system that didn't even know it was infected. The entrance to the data vault on sublevel 12 was a single, seamless wall of polished obsidian alloy with no visible controls, only a single biometric scanner. "This is as far as the ghost key gets us," Kalen whispered. "The vault is on a closed system. It's physically disconnected from the main network. Then we make our own door," Ilara replied. She unslung the modified plasma cutter from her pack. It was their one piece of crude, veil-forged reality in this pristine, orderly world. She set the cutter against the wall, and a low hum filled the corridor as the plasma beam began to sear through the alloy. It was slow, agonizing work. Every second felt like an hour, the whine of the cutter a scream in the oppressive silence. Finally, with a soft thud, a perfect circle of metal dropped inward, revealing the interior of the vault. The air that rushed out was freezing. The chamber within bathed in the cold blue light of cooling systems. In the center of the room, suspended in a magnetic containment field, was a single crystalline data spire. It pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, a serene and beautiful object that held the damnation of an entire species. "That's it," Kalen breathed. He pulled out his data slate, which now contained the final payload, Silas's kill code, a virus designed to corrupt the final pasture protocol and broadcast a feedback loop that would fry every server connected to it. He approached the spire, looking for an interface port. That's when a voice, calm and unnervingly familiar, echoed through the chamber. "I was wondering when you would arrive, Delegate Varric. Or should I say, the son of Tiber." Kalen froze, his blood turning to ice. Standing in the shadows on the far side of the chamber was a man. He was older, with silver hair and a face that was a mask of placid authority. He wore the simple, elegant robes of a high-ranking concordance administrator. It was the face of Kalen's father, Jorik Varric. Father Kalen stammered, his mind reeling. "I am not your father," the man said, his voice devoid of any emotion Kalen recognized. "Your father was a man of passion and contradiction, a flaw we are working to correct. I am what he will become, what you will all become. I am a shepherd." He stepped forward into the light, and Kalen saw it, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer under his skin, a network of microcircuitry. He wasn't a man. He was a prototype, a perfected version, the first sheep to be made a shepherd. "We have been aware of you since the moment that Cryopod was opened," the shepherd continued, his gaze flicking to Ilara. "The awakening of the old world. A fascinating, if predictable, variable. We allowed you to come this far. We wanted to observe, to see how the old chaos would react when faced with its own obsolescence." Ilara raised her sidearm, a compact pulse pistol she'd kept concealed. "It's going to react by putting a hole in your chest." The shepherd smiled. A cold, empty gesture. "That is the Varric talking. Soldier, the very flaw we are about to erase forever." He gestured to the spire. "You are too late. Your friend Silas is very clever, but we have been monitoring his network for years. We allowed him to build your key. We allowed you to breach this vault because your virus, your final act of defiance, is the final component we needed." He touched a console, and a new schematic appeared in the air above the spire. It showed Kalen's data slate, Silas's kill code, and how it was being rerouted. Your code is not a weapon. It's a carrier wave. It's designed to bypass the last security protocols that prevented our retrovirus from integrating with the deepest, most primitive parts of the human brain, the parts that produce your illogical rage, your stubborn hope. You are about to personally deliver the cure to your own disease. You will press that button, and in doing so, you will save humanity from itself. The sheer diabolical perfection of it was staggering. They hadn't been fighting their way in. They had been led. Every step of their journey a calculated move in the Shepherd's grand design. Kalen looked at his data slate, at the button that would either save or damn everyone, and then at the face of the thing that wore his father's features. He was trapped. The wolf had been led directly into the abattoir. The cold, sterile air of the data vault crackled with a tension that was almost electric. Kalen stared at the data slate in his hand. The activation key for Silas's virus for the Shepherd's final victory pulsing with a soft, inviting light. It was a perfect trap. A checkmate engineered with 200 years of patience. The Shepherd, the thing wearing his father's face, watched him with an expression of serene, intellectual curiosity, as a scientist might observe the final, predictable twitch of a dying specimen. "What happens if I don't?" Kalen asked, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "What happens if I smash this slate and we fight our way out of here?" The Shepherd's smile was a thin, bloodless line. "Then the protocol activates as scheduled in 47 standard minutes. Your defiance would be a meaningless, violent little footnote in the final chapter of your species' chaotic history. We offered you a role in your own salvation, a final, nay, poetic irony. But the outcome is, and always has been, inevitable." He was right. Fighting was pointless. They were in the heart of the enemy's fortress, miles beneath a city of billions, with no backup and no escape. But as Kalen looked at Ilara, he saw the lie. He saw the flicker of fire in her eyes, the same fire that had burned in General Tiber Varick, the same fire the Shepherds were so desperate to extinguish. They feared that fire. Inevitability was their weapon because they had no answer for true, unpredictable chaos. "You've studied us," Ilara said, her pulse pistol still aimed dead center at the Shepherd's chest. "You've mapped our genes, our history, our flaws. But you've never understood us. You think our rage is a weakness. It's a fuel. You think our hope is illogical. It's a weapon." The Shepherd's expression didn't change, but a new alert began to flash on a console behind him. A small, insignificant detail. An unscheduled energy surge in the Citadel's lower power conduits. "Your words are empty, soldier. The last gasp of a failed paradigm." "No," Kalen said, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face as he finally understood. "It's the last move you never saw coming." He looked at Ilara, a silent question passing between them. "Are you ready?" Her nod was almost imperceptible. She had seen it too. He turned back to the Shepherd. "You're right. I'm going to activate the virus. I'm going to save humanity." He held up the data slate, his thumb hovering over the activation key. "But you made one mistake. You built your perfect, orderly system, but you built it on top of our old, messy one. And you forgot what every junker in the Vale knows." He slammed his thumb down on the key. "Old tech is stubborn. It doesn't like to die." As the virus surged from his slate into the crystalline spire, the Shepherd's placid expression finally broke. A wave of confusion, then alarm, washed over his features. The data stream wasn't routing the way he expected. The kill code wasn't acting as a carrier wave. It was tearing through the final pasture protocol like a rabid wolf, corrupting files, erasing directives, and turning the elegant, precise code into digital gibberish. "What is this?" the shepherd demanded, his voice losing its calm, inhuman tone for the first time. "The code. It's rewriting itself. This isn't Silas's work." "No, it's not." A new voice crackled through Kalen's comm, gravelly and filled with static. "Silas. It's mine." Back on his asteroid at the edge of the black hole, Silas sat hunched over his console, his cybernetic eyes glowing with manic intensity. "You arrogant bastards! You monitored my network, but you only saw the surface. You never thought to look in the ghost code, in the machine's spirit. You thought my virus was the weapon. The virus was just the delivery system. The real weapon was the key." He laughed, a ragged, triumphant sound, a little something I picked up from a 200-year-old military data core, a Terran Federation logic bomb. It doesn't just erase data, it teaches it to hate itself. The shepherd stared in horror as the spire in front of him began to glow a furious, chaotic red. The feedback loop was catastrophic, but it was doing more than just destroying the protocol. It was broadcasting. It was screaming its own dying agony out into the Concordance network, a wave of pure, weaponized chaos. "You!" the shepherd snarled, his face contorting in a very human rage as his own programming began to fray. He lunged at Kalen, his placid demeanor gone, replaced by the fury he had so long sought to erase. Alara fired. The pulse blast caught the shepherd in the chest, sending him staggering back. But he wasn't just a man. He was a machine. He barely flinched, his cybernetic underpinnings sparking as he charged again. Kalen and Alara met his attack, a desperate, brutal dance of survival. They were no match for his strength, but they were two wolves, fighting with the desperation of a cornered species. As they fought, the citadel around them began to die. The lights flickered and went out, replaced by the stark, crimson glow of emergency alerts. The serene chimes of the upper levels were replaced by a cacophony of wailing sirens. The ghost in the machine Silas had unleashed wasn't just killing the final pasture protocol, it was infecting the entire citadel. It was teaching the calm, orderly systems how to be angry. Automated doors slammed shut. Turbo lifts seized. The entire city, the jewel of the Concordance, was having a violent, epileptic seizure. Kalen managed to jam a plasma charge into the shepherd's damaged chest cavity. "The flaw sends its regards," he grunted, and kicked him away. The detonation blew the shepherd in half. They didn't wait to celebrate. "Silas, we need a way out," Ilara shouted into her comm. "Way ahead of you," the hermit's voice replied. "The chaos is a perfect cover. Your maintenance alert on sublevel 9, I've escalated it to a full-blown reactor coolant leak. They're evacuating the entire sector. Head to emergency access corridor Gamma 7. There's a waste disposal chute that vents directly to the outer docking rings. It won't be pleasant, but it'll get you out." They ran through a dying world. The pristine white corridors were now slick with burst coolant pipes and filled with panicked maintenance drones flying in chaotic, nonsensical patterns. They reached the disposal chute, a dark, vertical tunnel, just as a security team rounded the corner. their faces a mixture of confusion and aggression as the system's conflicting orders warred in their minds. Kalen and Ilara leaped into the darkness. The ride was a nauseating, high-speed slide through the Citadel's guts. They were dumped unceremoniously onto a pile of refuse containers in a deserted section of the commercial docking bay, the sounds of the Citadel's lockdown echoing around them. The echo was exactly where they'd left it, a sliver of darkness in a world of flashing red lights. As they lifted off, leaving the wounded, screaming heart of the Concordance behind them, the scale of what they had done began to sink in. On the main view screen, they saw not just the Citadel in chaos, but the entire Ethelberg swarm. The virus was spreading. Traffic control systems were failing, sending ships into disarray. Communications across the Concordance were a mess of static and corrupted data ghost. They hadn't just stopped the final pasture. They had plunged the entire Concordance into a dark age. They had given the placid, orderly galaxy a system-wide nervous breakdown. Weeks later, huddled in the relative safety of Silas's hermitage, they watched the fallout. The Concordance was fractured. Without the central, guiding intelligence of the shepherds, regional systems were left to fend for themselves. Old rivalries, long suppressed, began to surface. Some systems fell into anarchy. Others established martial law. The great, placid pasture was no more. It was a wilderness again. "It's not a victory," Ilara said quietly, watching the chaotic news feeds. "It's just a different kind of war." "It's a chance," Kalen corrected her. He looked at the star chart, at the distant, quarantined speck that was old Earth. The cage was broken. The fences were down. He didn't know what would happen next, whether humanity would rise from the ashes of the Concordance's sterile peace, or tear itself apart all over again. But for the first time in 200 years, the choice belonged to them. The flock was scattered. The shepherds were dead. And across the galaxy, in the quiet, forgotten corners of the Veil and in the broken heart of the Concordance, the wolves were waking up. Kalen looked at Ilara, the soldier from the past, and then at his own reflection in the viewport, the junker who had found his future in the ghosts of his ancestors. Their work wasn't done. It had just begun. They were no longer running. They were hunting.